We're below the middle of the page, Memhei, believe it or not. The line begins be-erech mibiyah at the end of that line. So we were sort of vacillating back and forth, trying to pin down the principle of Atzilus. On the one hand, this is essentially a lakus. On the other hand, it has a worldly phenomenon because it's the initial element that has a shachas to work. And that's why it's called memutza. Memutza means intermediary, and as we explained, intermediary does not mean that it simply sends supplies to the lower madriga. Intermediary means that it brings the element of the high madriga to the lower madriga. Now we continue further. Gam yesh lema. It is also possible to explain it in the following way. Sheyesh ba'atzilus gufa beis madrigas. That within Atzilus there are two distinct madrigas. Namely, v'hainu, bechin is ho Atzilus mitzad atzmo, the bechin of Atzilus in and of itself, for its own definition. And then there is an Atzilus, that which is related, which relates to Biyah. So that we are saying that in Atzilus itself there are distinct pathways. And as it is explained elsewhere, the be'ila ve'olul, the essence of the Atzilus, ba'atzilus gufo, that the ila ve'olul means essentially what we call seder hishtalshelus, cause and effect. Ila is the cause, which means that this is the initiator, this is the higher madriga, and olul is that which results from it. That it's explained elsewhere that in the phenomenon of Ila v'olul of Atzilus, of the essence spheres, the Atzilus, ba'atzilus guf. Now, essence spheres, 10 spheres, are essentially Ila v'olul, because the starting point of the 10 spheres is chochmah. Then from chochmah, it continues to develop further into bina. Then from bina, through the aspect of das, it goes into the 7 spheres, the 6 midas, so and so on and so forth. So this is a form of Ila v'olul, because as we explained many times, I'd say chochmah and bina are not independent qualities. Bina is affected by chochmah in order to give it its oil, its meaning. So this is Ila v'olul within Atzilus. So it's explained elsewhere that within the madreges of Ila v'olul, of the Atzilus, ba'atzilus gufa, within Atzilus itself, which is Ila v'olul, within Atzilus and the spheres as they develop one from the other. Yesh hefresh gadol, there's a great difference. Bein ha'ila v'olul shel tzerech Atzilus atzmei, between the ila v'olul between the developmental process that is for the sake of Atzilus itself, and in contrast to that which develops within Atzilus, l'tzerech biyah, for the sake of biyah. So, this is brought down, it says it's explained elsewhere. We bring it down over here in order to understand the general concept of Atzilus. But just to explain these words, as we already discussed yesterday, and then tzerech biyah, this is essentially represented here below also in a similar form as we have the Rav and the Talmud, where the Rav also has to develop his chochmah into bina and then further into all the midas. But this he has to develop for himself, for his own sake, in order to know, to fully understand his own insight, his own truth. And then there is that which he develops in order to affect this upon the Talmud, in order to transmit to the Talmud. As we discussed many times, I just want to kind of reiterate and always keep it fresh. Chochmah, Bina and Das, and all the spheres and all the koiches, all the faculties are initially rooted in the nefesh itself. In other words, what is the underlying reality of chochmah? It is the ratzon and tynug in the nefesh, into the nefesh itself. And it's important that, I always repeat, in nowadays we should clearly understand this. It may appear that the whole process of sechel or chochmah is that we have a paradox, we have a kasha. How is this happen? This is like we have different pieces of a puzzle, and the whole smarts consists in putting the puzzle together. Which comes first, which comes later. That is not what sechel is about. Sechel is what creates the puzzle. Sechel is what creates the whole overview of the puzzle, the initial overview. What do I want to represent in the puzzle? And then we have Bina, where it breaks it down into little pieces and makes and puts it together, in order to be able to represent it. But the sechel represents the reality of the nefesh, and the reason it comes out in the form of a puzzle, because this reality of the nefesh is in the nefesh, and it cannot be expressed and practiced and realized in practical life, in worldly life, without it coming down to a lower level, first into chochmah, as we discussed, and then into bina and in the other midas. So that the Rav, who is the initiator of this whole concept, it's called Atover Chodesh, Chassidus. He has the initial insight. He has to first, and this initial insight is what is actually trickles down, is illuminated by the nefesh itself, by the ratzon and tynug. He realizes certain truth, and then he brings it down into chochmah, in order for him to realize it and for him to be able to relate to it. even though he has it in its initial state, in the nefesh, in the ratzon and tynug, but that's not having it in his own view. He doesn't really recognize it and appreciate it. So he has to first fully delve into it and fully appreciate it. And then when he appreciates it, he then further identifies it even further down, because that is when it becomes actualized. That is when it is no longer a concept, but it's a reality. And it becomes a reality, really, any sechel becomes a reality, not even when it is in chochmah and bina, but when it is actually reflected in midas. Every sechel has to have some kind of ramification in terms of midas. So I'm not going into that, but that is the reality. In other words, a sechel has to permeate the entire person. Just like the initial sechel originates from the nefesh, which is the total reality. In order for that sechel to become actualized, it has to be reflected in total reality of the human being, all the way down to all the midas, even to machshava dibur, even to action. This is all for the within the Rav himself. In other words, if the Rav conceptualize, I'll give you a practical example. I'll conceptualize the union of the unity of the Jewish people, and he sees it's a unity of the Jewish people, and he further identifies it to himself. This is all one neshama that comes down into the various parts and so forth. When is that fully actualized? When it translates in giving stock. As long as it doesn't have that kind of translation of something of that nature, that what happens to the fellow Jew is something which is within his realm, and he has to respond to it, then he hasn't really fully brought it down from his own nefesh. He has to go through all the spheres, all the koiches. This is when it becomes actual by him. Now, once it's actual by him, then he can impart it, begin to impart it and develop it for the Talmud. The Talmud is Shalei be-erech. The Talmud doesn't have the nefesh insight, but the Talmud has the practical reality. And then he begins to reveal it to him from bottom up, to show him the correlationship and so forth, until he brings him, he enables him to see it also from its inception. Like we said, correlation, 1 and 1 is 2, not 2 ones. That is able to reveal to the Talmud. And from that the Talmud goes higher and higher and higher. These are two distinct processes. One is for his own clarity, and then to understand and come down to the Talmud, where he has to start from a bottom up form.
What does it mean bottom up?
Huh?
What does it mean bottom up? Like what?
Like we say, that's explained. But Rav, 2 is something which is the lowest level from his sechel. That there is a relationship between 2 individual pieces. That's the lowest level. Initially, he sees it that there is a unity. The Talmud, he can't say there is a unity. He doesn't have the insight of the nefesh. He has to reveal it. He has to show him from bottom up. So it's a different process. And this is what he says over here. There is a great difference between ha'ila ve'olo shel tzedach Atzilus atzmi, the ha'ila ve'olo that is for the sake of Atzilus itself, which means to reveal and develop all the content of Atzilus itself, which is, as I said, from top down, and that which is developed for the sake of biyah. the muscle, like we said, top down and bottom up is very apropos for Atzilus and Biyah, because Atzilus is permeated completely, illuminated totally with the truth of Ein Sof, with the godly truth of Kesed. Except he has to, he develops from that, identifying the various qualities that are contained therein. This is Ilu v'Yolim Mimayla Lamato. Then there is Ilu v'Yolim Shinitzeda Biyah. This is in order to be able to transmit it and to explain it to in Biyah, in the world. Biyah is a completely different entity. Atzilus exists because Elokus exists. Biyah exists because it's being created. It doesn't have an initial truth. It has to find its truth. It's a completely different presence.
So even though the Rav, when he's going from the top down, he ultimately comes to how this unity reflects itself in the
yeah, but there it is not because he's perplexed. Where does that unity come from? He's creating it.
and he has to then relate to people who would be perplexed as to where this
Yeah, but then it's a completely different thing. He has to come down and start developing it at their level. Sorry. All right. And so he's explained elsewhere that there is a big difference between these two forms of Ilu v'Olam. So therefore that means that within Atzilus itself there are two structures. The structure that develops Atzilus and the structure that develops within Atzilus that which will be transmitted to Biyah. Okay, again, like every else, we can stay on these two lines for a long time, but we're not going to. V'zehu, the chochmah da Atzilus nikro Ayin, and thus this is the point that is expressed by saying that chochmah da Atzilus is called Ayin. Ayin means nothing, an unentity. So this term Ayin we have encountered at different and different circumstances, meaning pointing to different aspects. The Ayin that we're saying that chochmah da Atzilus is called Yesh Mei Ayin, it's called Ayin. Chochmah is called Ayin. Lehiyoisa bechinas ha'or levad, being that the chochmah is only a ha'ora. That does not have any significance relative to Atzmus Ein Sof. The Gam, okay, we're going to go straight and then we come back. The Gam Nikro Ayin Lamal Yusuf, and Chochmah da Atzilus is also called Ayin Lamal Yusuf, representing, pointing to its supreme quality. But you say in it a smoking klal, that is pointing to the insignificance of Chochmah. And then also it has another meaning in what Ayin, that Chochmah is called Ayin, Lamal Yusa, to point to its supremacy. That it is not in the state of Mitzius Dover, Adayin, yet. What are these two aspects? On the one hand, we say, Ein Tiv Smokim, that is a ha'ora levad. And we explained the principle of ha'ora. Which means that it has a presence only due to its effect, due to its functionality, functional effect. It does not have its own presence, but it has a presence because of the effect of its of how it affects things upon which it shines. This is called the ha'ora. Ha'ora means it reflects the higher truth, but it reflects it. And what is the significance of that reflection? That reflection enables the lower level to benefit from it. This is called the ha'ora. So chochmah is a ha'ora levad. Chochmah, just as we always say, the most of a chochmah is sight, re'iyah. In sight there is no tangible presence. And yet, it reveals an essential truth. It's not the truth, it reveals the truth. It enables that truth to be observed and to be further effective. This is called the ha'ora levad. So chochmah is a ha'ora levad from Ayin Seif. And then also there is, he says, a ha'ora in the from Ayin. That's what's called Ayin. Ayin lemal yusa, to express the malia, its mila, its supreme quality, in that it's not a metzias dover. If it's not a metzias dover, then what is it? It is totally and completely imbued and related to Ayin Seif. It is there because Ayin Seif is there. Even though it only, so to speak, points to the Ayin Seif, but it is not, neither is it a completely separate entity. And therefore that makes that points to the mile of chochmah, that it is ayin. It is not a separate metzias unto itself. Like we always point out, that even from chochmah is, even the tower level chochmah means the ability to see the truth without translating it, what's in it for me. Metzias, a metzias though.
So the ha'ara is a lower level?
What?
The fact that it's ha'ara and it's any Tevet smokim is a lower level?
It is not the lower level. As a matter of fact, it is a higher level. It's a ha'ara Ayin Seif. But the word ha'ara, the reason it's called ayin is because it's lower than the Ayin Seif. In other words, we're saying ayin because when we compare it to Ayin Seif, it is ayin from a lower perspective. When you compare it to biyah, it is ayin from a higher perspective. That's l'mal yusa. Yeah. Okmoy nekudas hahaskolo. And this is further elaborating on this Inyan that chochmah is called Ayin. We said for two reasons. One, it is a ha'ora lavatum from Atzilus, and the other is lamal yusad, that it is not a mitzius. Ukmei nekudas ha'haskola, as it is, as we can actually identify it in the kudas ha'haskola, in the point of a certain of the concept. Al derech moshel, for example. She'eino nitfeses adayin bebchinas mitzius. The nekudas ha'haskola is not grasped, even though it's a haskola, which means we're already aware of this sechel. It is not the way it is contained in the nefesh, but not even the way it is in Keha Maskil. It is already something which reveals itself. There's a nekuda of the haskola, the point of the haskola. So this nekuda haskola has both in Yoni. Shal sozen nikro borag hamavrik. For this, because of this inyan of nekuda haskola, that she'eino nitfesas adayin bebchinas mitzius, that is not yet in the form or at the level of mitzius, of a presence. That's why it's called a nekudas haskola. And shal suzen nikro borag hamavrik. In reference and to describe this nekudas haskola is called borag hamavrik, a fleeting spark. Lefi she'eino bebchinas tfiso adayin, because it is not yet in the bebchina, in that realm of tfiso, of being able to be grasped, and it does not yet grasp the whole inyan that it represents. There is what do we have here? I have just a couple of minutes. In the physical world, in physics, there is a concept of a point, where the proper definition of a point, a line has a single dimension, length. A plane has two dimensions, length and width. These dimensions are identified by the point. The line begins from this point and that point. Now, these points themselves do not have a dimension, because if we have a dimension, it's no longer the line. The line consists of many little individual points. It does not have a dimension. It's a phenomenal thing. It's a conceptual element within the physical world. This is what's called, what many times when we spoke about it the other day, the center of gravity. And if you have, if you can identify the center of gravity of anything properly, to the point where there is no dimension at all, just the pure point, you can balance anything on the pin, except for the pin would crash, would crumble. But essentially, you can balance anything on the pin, because you have an equal weight on all sides, and it'll balance. But you have to identify that pin without it having any dimensions. If it has dimensions, it goes a little bit this way, and then it's not the center. It's no longer the center. So that nekuda, and the same thing is in nekudas hahaskola. when one seeks to understand, and he is in very, very concerted focus, trying to get to the point. This point, when it's realized, is an unidentifiable. I got it. But he doesn't yet have, not only doesn't have the words, he doesn't even have the means to refer to it in his own mind. In order for him to refer to it in his own mind, he has to go back to this Boragamarik. But I sensed something. It made sense. I got it because I saw that it makes sense. He doesn't even have a mitzias. This is the elusive properties of chochmah. It reveals something, but it doesn't have its own presence. And this is why chochmah represents the truth in its purest state. Because it doesn't have its own presence, it doesn't interfere with the reality itself. This is what we said originally. We have to understand that sechel originates from the truth, not by solving a puzzle. It creates a puzzle. To create a puzzle, it has to have access to Ayin and Soif. In our case, to the truth of the nefesh. And this truth of the nefesh comes in this form of revelation of a non-mitzias in chochmah, and yet it's a revealed thing. And from this non-mitzias revelation, you can then further begin to focus on it and develop it into bina and so forth. And the reason you can develop it into bina is because this borag hamavik, this spark, the spark itself you can grasp. But what does the spark do? It illuminates. It illuminates something. This illuminating, then you can grasp it. I remember I was visiting in Tannersville, and I had to go. It was Friday night. We had to go to a certain place to dorm, to sleep. And me and my wife were walking, and we're not familiar with the area at all. And we know we have to go in that direction, but you can't even see the demarcation line of the street. And you constantly, you can step into a ditch, right? Because there's no sidewalks, you just walk in the street. And we were really very concerned how we're going to get there in one piece. Further down, about 500 feet away, there was a flickering light. This light was broken, so you would come on for 5 seconds, and then you would go off. So we waited for that light, and that light gave us a little bit of a presentation of what's going on, where are we. Then we started walking until we lost that perspective. This is Pshat Borag HaMavrik. It illuminates something. That is its presence. It doesn't have a presence of its own. And that's chochmah. This is why chochmah can perceive and can relate to an unidentifiable reality. Like we say, the chochmah anon nosiv malko. I take the king, as we discussed many times. What's a king? What is the king giving you? And yet that is what the chochmah is doing to. This is it for this morning. Have a great day. Zos Chanukah. Huh?
Yeah, okay.
Are you shooting?
For
I can
this.
hear.
Share tonight.
Oh, she tonight. Yeah, makes it.
Okay, no problem. I want to give it instead to